In Line podcast, and today we're joined by Johnny Lawrence. Now, Johnny has a great story to tell about addiction, about overcoming addiction, but he's also a motivational speaker and a life coach. It's amazing to have Johnny with us. We've tracked his stuff quite a lot on LinkedIn, other social media. We'd advise you do the same. And we've also watched a documentary on Johnny where he gives a very frank and personal interview about his life story and about what he's doing now. So if we just get started, Johnny, straight away with where you grew up and how you felt about growing up there.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on the podcast tonight. I'm looking forward to the conversation, and we've had some quite lovely conversations already about sweets and whatnot. So we're obviously going to have fun tonight. But yeah, I grew up in Hertfordshire, but I was originally born in Islington in London, and I was born to a white mother and a native African father, and it wasn't one of the nicest of upbringings. I had a lot of domestic violence as a kid, which led, as you've seen in the documentary, to subsequent addiction later in life as I struggled to manage my emotions. But what I found as a child or as just growing up was that I had a very difficult relationship with the emotion rejection because I felt rejected in pretty much every aspect of my life. I was rejected at home by my father, who obviously was very violent, and I watched him be violent to my siblings and my mother. But also at school, I was dyslexic, so I wasn't very academic, didn't excel there at all. And then when it came to playing sports, I was undernourished, and I didn't have that sort of typical male role model that would teach me sport, play balls, games with me, or whatever, anything like that. So I wasn't very good at sport either. So I found myself getting bullied quite a lot for being thick, is what they said, and unathletic, or just not being able to play football. You know how that is. You know, if you can't play football, you can't play certain sports, then it's difficult to fit in with the rest of the lads. And then out in the big wide world, as you can see, I'm a mixed race man. So I was a mixed race kid as well. And when I was out in the world, I found, especially in that time in the 80s, 90s, that I wasn't accepted by black people because I was seen as being too white, and I wasn't accepted by white people because I was seen as being too black. So in every aspect of my life, I just felt rejected. And it was a very difficult existence for me. And it wasn't really until my teenage years where I started to really see the impact of that upbringing as I struggled to make relationships, and whether that be friendships or romantic relationships or even employment. I found it very difficult to trust people, and I was always very suspicious and paranoid, which wasn't very, what didn't make me a very employable employee or boyfriend or or friend, if I'm honest. It was difficult.
So, just on the point of the paranoia, because I think that's something that a lot of people experience. Where do you think that came from? Was it just the sort of the deep mistrust of people, and then there's like a constant suspicion about what they're up to? Was that? Do you think that's where it came from, the paranoia?
I think every significant person in my life had let me down, and I was pretty much waiting for that to happen in every relationship I had. You know, when your father, who's supposed to be the person that teaches you how to go from a boy to a man, violently hurts you and does the same to your family members, and just basically doesn't do anything for you in any way other than tear you down and destroy your self-worth, then you feel let down, you feel rejected. And then when anyone shows you any level of love or respect or kindness in any way, there's this natural distrust. You're sort of waiting for them to do something. I say it now. I've gone around to lots of ex-girlfriends, friends, groups of people, and apologized for the way I was, and they fully understood. Luckily, I was seen with forgiveness, but I made it pretty much impossible for people to be in a relationship with me because the thing is, nobody's perfect. And if you look hard enough, you're going to find flaws. And if you're not careful, you're going to turn them flaws into what you think are something sinister. And before you know it, it all falls down. And let's face it, really, when it gets that intense, who's worth it? You know, sometimes it's just easier to hang out with people that are being nice and easy to be friends with, you know? So I understand that.
Yeah, yeah, true. Yeah, yeah. And okay, because the relationship side, the relationship that you have with your parents can help to form the relationships you have with others. They're the primary people that you spend the most time around at an early age, and they can inform a lot of the discourse. Um, how was the relationship with your father in terms of did it worsen with time? Do you think, or was his behaviour always consistently terrible? If that makes sense.
Yeah. No, he was always the same. Um, I don't remember. I perhaps remember two moments of happiness with my father, um, but I'm still to this day looking at it through child eyes. I don't know what was going on really, but there was one time at the zoo. I remember him seeming like he was having a nice time, and he used to watch a lot of boxing, and that he used to love watching boxing. So I got into boxing as a way to see if I could bond, or I suppose I'm only interpreting that behavior from an adult. But he was always that way. He didn't know how to be any other way, and that's kind of how I moved past it. I recognized that um, I could sit, and I did for a while. I sat and blamed and wondered why he was the way he was and what I'd done wrong and all of these different things. Only to realize that some people are just not capable of certain things. They were never shown it, and they don't know how to show love. They don't know how to be a father. They don't know how to do these things. So he was always the same, and it really wasn't until an incident in the house where I walked in on him beating my mum and younger brother, and I was a bit older, I was mid-teens, and just through some primal reaction, I just run over and pulled him off. I was a bit bigger at that point, and I think my mum and I realised that this was probably going to happen again, and that it was actually creating an unsafe environment where perhaps he would do something or even I would do something that we would both regret. So we both made the decision, my mum and I, for me to move out. And my relationship with him got better in the sense of I never saw him. So that was that. It didn't get any worse, and it wasn't until a little while later when I had children myself, or my wife had children, that we I decided to go back and have a photograph with my sons and my dad, and I took the opportunity to have a conversation with him, see if I could clear the air. Really was quite willing to forgive, just to have a dad, and to give the boys a second granddad, and he hadn't changed a bit. And in that moment I realized, and it gave me peace actually, because in that moment I was able to look at him and realize that there was a problem between him and I, but it wasn't my problem, it was his. And I sort of gave it back to him, and it felt very much like I'd set myself free in that moment, because I stopped thinking about why and what and all of those different things, and just moved on. I was able to let go, which was really, really nice.
Yeah, because that's something that's not always talked about. Is that a lot of people talk about anger and resentment and feeling, which I think is a natural part of mistreatment. In a sense, I think there are natural emotions that come from certain actions or perceptions of actions, and part of that is thinking, well, why did they do it? I resent the fact that they've done that. But did you find yourself struggling with those sort of emotions, with thinking, I'm really resentful, I'm really struggling with anger at the way you've been treated, or could you move beyond it quite quick?
No, anger was quite a significant experience for me, for as long as I can remember. Really, it isn't anymore because I've processed a lot of the stuff that had happened over the years. But really, what I learned was that, let's say we have primary emotions and secondary emotions, and the primary emotions are the sensitive emotions that are about events, and the secondary emotions are the emotions about an emotion. Now, the sensitive primary emotions are emotions that we don't want any part of. They're so sensitive, they're so debilitating, they're so impossible feeling to have, that if we're given any other option to have any other type of experience, then we will. And that's where the secondary emotions come in. So the secondary emotion for me on this occasion was anger. And the way to look at that is, what was I angry about? Well, I was angry because I felt disappointed that I had a collection of events that I felt really, really scared about. And here's the thing: when we have a lot of time, people try to process events in their life, and things, really awful things happen to us as human beings, it's in a sense unavoidable. But when we say we're going to process or we're going to go for a therapeutic journey or a healing journey, we try to heal ourselves from the events that happen in our life. But here's the thing, we can't change what happened. We can't go back in time and change the events that have happened to us. So, what are we actually doing? Well, when we had that event, we had a significant emotion that imprinted on our life. And every time we have any variation of that experience, of that emotion, then we have the same emotional responses. Perhaps it's fear, and we have this irrational, overwhelming reaction to fear. So really, what I decided to do was I needed to develop a better relationship with certain emotions in my life. One of them being rejection, another one being fear, another one being vulnerable, another one feeling inadequate, um, disappointment, feeling helpless. These were all emotions that I just felt so I wasn't able to have them. Therefore, I'd have an emotional reaction like I would ghost people, or I would um, get really angry and say things or do things that I regretted. So for me, it was about re-establishing a different relationship with those emotions. And for a long time, I used alcohol thinking that was doing it, because when I drank alcohol, I didn't care about things anymore. But that wasn't the way to fix it, because the next day you've got a hangover and it's very hard not to be grumpy and angry and all of those different things. So after a while, the I realized that the alcohol was my way of outsourcing emotional regulation, and that what I had to do was the very difficult task of learning how to emotionally regulate without alcohol. And that's the thing. See, alcohol, not drinking alcohol is abstinence is one part of being sober, but then you're just left with the emotions and no way of solving it. So that's why people go back to it. Well, not everybody, obviously. In my case, that's why I went back to it. But what I realized after a while was, okay, I'm not having these cravings for alcohol. I'm having these reactions, these emotional reactions, and my only known way of finding a solution to this emotional reaction is to drink alcohol. I need to find another way. And that starts with identifying the difficult emotions that you're experiencing. What is the emotion? And we will always opt for the secondary emotion. Oh, I'm angry. Okay, you're angry. Have you ever tried to have any sort of rational conversation with an angry person? It doesn't really go anywhere. It just goes to blame and resentment and anger and rage and all of these things. So the right question for me is not why am I angry, because that's too much of an introspective question. It's going to lead me some probably to blame of some kind, blame of somebody else, blame of myself. So the right question is, what are you angry about? Because now we're really starting to get to what the problem is. And what we're trying to do here is we're trying to turn our anxieties into problems so we can find solutions. That's what it comes down to with emotions, in essence.
Yeah, and that makes sense when you said about outsourcing. And I'm guessing that there's various different means by which you can outsource. So you can actually look at other vices as well. Do you think where you think, right, it's not just alcohol, it could be, can it be a behavioral, I guess? Do you think it can be behavioral?
Yeah.
The
Well,
how
addiction
how
is
you
a
regulate?
behavior. Yeah, addiction is a
Yeah.
behavior. It doesn't matter what you're addicted to as such. It's about addiction, in my opinion, is not about the thing you're addicted to. It's about the way it makes you feel. That's why you can blow up your life by drinking too much, by taking drugs, by having an affair, by gambling, uh, porn, whatever it is. There's so many ways that you can have these difficult and challenging emotions and have this need to escape. And then you lean into alcohol, you lean into drugs, you lean into an affair, and you have this sort of obsession with it because it's better than the reality that you're living in. It's a choice in a sense. It doesn't feel like it. It doesn't feel like it, and it takes a long time for it to become a choice again. Because what happens is over time you practice this behavior, and it becomes a habit. And our bodies are absolutely masters at creating habits. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to drive a car. It would be impossible.
Yeah. Some of us still learning to do that, but yeah, yeah, it's you just think it's scary. How much as well? This is it's a bit of an offshoot, but it's scary how much we are regulated by habit. And the problem is that I guess with addictive behavior as well, once you're in the midst of it, you realize how ingrained that must be and how much of a habit it is. And people talk about neural networks and about how habits literally do, is it neuroplasticity, where you can literally see, well, not see, but you understand what I mean. You can literally see that a biological change has taken place within the brain that's facilitated the formation of the habit,
Yeah, I mean,
which is
it's that
scary.
it that what I like to try and do is I like to try and find ways for simpler ways for people to understand things, and I think that when it comes to a habit, when something is ingrained within you so powerfully, so strongly, it has this feeling of being right, which means that anything else you do feels wrong.
Mm.
It's a real feeling of like, this doesn't feel right, this feels wrong, this feels dangerous, this, and then again but it kicks off emotions, right? Kicks off our emotions. Now emotions get involved and they become very powerful, and our emotions very much feel like they're orders, like we have to do them, like we can't not do them. It comes with this real serious consequential feeling, so that's why, really, in essence, what I try to do is I try to bring people's emotions down to a point where they can create awareness about what's happening. So I've got this thing called the 4 stages of behavioral change, and it's 4 A's. Awareness is the first one. You cannot change what you are not aware of. If you're having these autonomous responses, these emotional triggers, these emotional reactions, then, and you're not aware of them, they're just happening, and before you know it, you've blown up your life and you've said something or done something. If you're not aware of what the emotion is that you experienced that triggered it all, if you can't become aware of that, then it's going to become a very difficult task to solve that problem. And I like to use the analogy of potholes. It's like you're driving your car down a road and you've got a nice hot coffee and you've got a nice clear road ahead of you and everything is okay, you're okay, and then you hit a pothole and all of a sudden your car's out of control and you're spiraling towards a tree, and eventually there's damage and impact and things get hurt and people get damaged, things get damaged. And that's what it's like when you're emotionally triggered. People say really helpful things like calm down, or what's going on, and always asking all of these questions, and you can't answer it because you are triggered. It's like saying to somebody who's spiraling towards a tree driving a car, "I'll just slow down." I can't. I've got no control over this at all. Like that's the whole point of it. You're out of control. So identifying that emotion that triggers you is key to it all. And at the time that you're out of control, that's probably not the time to identify the emotion. It's about reflection. It's about going, okay, okay, I've crashed my car. Thankfully, I'm okay. When I drive down that road, there's a big old pothole, and I know it's there now. And what we're doing emotionally is we're going, okay, well, that pothole is rejection. So every time I experience rejection, I have this overwhelming emotional response that causes my behavior to say things and do things that I later regret. And after a couple of these, I end up losing my job or losing my girlfriend or whatever it is. So we have to identify
Yeah.
our relationship with rejection. So that's the first thing, awareness. The next one is accountability. Okay, somewhere in here, yeah, you don't get to blame somebody else for everything that happens. There's something in here that you're accountable for. And when I say accountable, I don't mean you're responsible for it or you're to blame for it. I mean, somewhere within here, you have given away your power because you're waiting for somebody else to do something that you're going to benefit from. What is it? What is that thing? Right? Yeah, but they should do it. Yeah, they probably should, but they're not going to. So what are you going to do now? Well, I'm going to keep waiting. Okay, well, that's probably not going to work out. So where here can I take accountability for my life? Where can I take back some power in this situation? Where can I start to look at the things that I can do something about? And then the next one is acceptance. There will be things in the situations and life that you cannot do anything about. There'll be people in your life that you wish would change, but they won't. There's situations that you wish were different, but they're not. And you have to accept them. You have to stop focusing on them. You have to stop obsessing over them. You have to stop trying to outthink it. And you have to focus on the things that you can be accountable for. Focus on them instead. Because here's the thing, I also know that telling someone to not do something isn't helpful. you have to give people things to do, not to not do. That's kind of impossible. So this is what the accountability is about. And then the last one is the actions. Now you know what you're aware of. Now you've taken accountability for what you can and you've accepted what you can't. What are you going to do? Now, what are you going to do? What's the actions you're going to take? And if we can work through that process, and it's a practice. Listen, I'm not saying that you wake up, you come and see Johnny on a Tuesday, and on Wednesday it's all squared away. It doesn't work like that. It's a practice, and we live through experiences, and we learn, and we reflect, and we keep trying to grow. And there'll be people in our lives that are very difficult characters, and we will keep going into those situations, hoping that this time it will be different, and it's not. But it's okay because we take away the learning from it and the wisdom from it when emotions have simmered down, and we try to move forward. And eventually, one day, if we don't give up on it, we will be successful. That's what I've seen anyway.
Yeah. So it's that consistent attempts at changing the way that you think about things. Because in a way, like you said about the expectation element in the 4As, the problem with the when you get into a situation where you are expecting a certain reaction from them or expecting them to do something that benefits you, and then when they don't do it chronically, that can create this kind of pool of resentment, if you like, or a pool of what of emptiness in the relationship. Does that make sense? There's something missing, or
Yeah.
you feel there's something missing because the expectation is not met.
Well, I think expectations is a trap anyway. I don't. I think we should try as best as we can to really not have any expectations, which I know sounds like a tall order, because I think people mistake expectations for what they want, their preferences. You can have a preference, absolutely. You should have a preference, in fact, but to expect it, hmm, that's difficult. We shouldn't expect it. We can want it, we can hope for it, but we shouldn't expect it. We should also, because what happens when we expect is we completely ignore all of the other options. So, say you buy somebody a gift and you take that gift to them, and your expectation is that they're going to be so over the moon. Well, it's also possible that they'll hate it, but you just ignore that one and you wander in with your gift with the expectation of hoping that they love it, and they don't. And now you're really, really disappointed. But had you have gone in going, it's 50-50, they might like it, they might not, the expectation is not going to lead to the very obvious road of disappointment. Actually, that's not true. There will be some disappointment, but it won't be that gutting disappointment that it is when you have only one expectation. I don't think.
Yes, yeah, and it's I guess even from like the law of probability, it's unlikely that your particular expectation is going to be met to the degree you want it to be. It's
That's
like
right.
of all the
That's why
hundreds
it's
of
not worth
things.
formulating that.
Yeah,
That's why it's not worth
yeah,
formulating that expectation in the first place. Once you decide what you think is going to happen, you're now eliminating all other possibilities. If you look at it, like you just said, the probability of that, it can only really end in disappointment. It's so unlikely that you're going to get exactly what you're looking for. And some people can be extremely specific about what they're looking for in life.
and it's so stupid though because it's so illogical. But then when you're in the heat of the
Mm.
moment, in a row with someone, or you feel that there's a deficiency, you're looking at thinking, well, yeah, but it is reasonable. It's a reasonable expectation, but obviously it's not. It's not objectively, but subjectively in that moment of high emotion, it becomes palatable and agree
I
and it's
think
reasonable, but it's not.
I think our emotions don't care about logic. They only know how to do the emotion. That's it. And once we try and apply logic to it, it starts to get really difficult. And again, it comes down to them emotional triggers, right? If you are completely there's what's the word? I can't remember what it's called now, where you're willfully blind, where you can become willfully blind to something. You can wander into a situation
Yeah,
and logically, there are many outcomes. There has to be, there always is. But you've walked in going, nope, this is what's going to happen. And it's like that willfully blind. You just won't believe. And this is what we do. We do that to protect ourselves because sometimes experiences happen to us in life that are so difficult for us to process. In essence, we don't want to process them. We don't want to. We don't want them to be true. We don't want any part of them. And if we just ignore them, then they'll go away. That's the root of procrastination. But actually, what we can do is sometimes there's a reality in life that we have to accept. So an event happens, and before the event, life was a certain way. After the event, is different, but we don't want it to be. So what we do is we very clever and very able to create little narratives in our mind, little things that we can twist and change that we can believe. Yeah, we can convince ourselves that they're sort of true, and then we start to sell that to the rest of the world, and then they reflect it back to us, and we buy it back. And then if we do it enough times and we have this exchange, then we say, yeah, that's true. And we can actually convince ourselves of this. We can convince ourselves that that's what happened and this is what's going on. But the problem is, life doesn't care about your little lie, and it keeps reflecting the truth back to you. And what life will do is it will keep escalating that truth until you get to a point where you go, "Oh my god, I can't believe this has happened." It's like, really? It's been happening slowly over time, and you've just been ignoring it. But if this can happen for years, this can happen for decades. We are master manipulators of our own mind, in essence. So it's a tricky situation when you're working with the mind, and I think really I say it a lot to clients. There are only three things that you can control in this world, and I call it the EAT approach. And they are your effort. You can control how much effort you put into something, how much effort you put into a relationship, how much effort you put into a task, how much effort you put into your job, your family, your friends, whatever it is, your children, your wife, whatever it is. You can control the amount of effort you put in. Now, that doesn't mean that you're not going to be tired, a bit grumpy, not want to, all of those things, but you can still control the effort that you show up with. The next is your attitude. Okay, you're putting in a lot of effort, but you're being a prick. So change your attitude. Be nicer, be kinder, put a smile on your face. Sometimes my wife asks me to go to events and I don't want to go. But I go, and I don't just go and make the effort. I go and I put a smile on my face, and I try, and I have conversations, and I do all sorts of things with people. And sometimes I'm pleasantly surprised, and it's a nice evening. Other times I'm like, phew, thank goodness that's done. And then the last one,
Yeah.
which I think is the most important, is your ability to tell the truth. Telling the truth is always an option. It's not always the most
Yeah.
desirable option because it might mean that you have to hurt somebody or disappoint somebody or have some sort of difficult emotion that you don't want to experience. But really often, if you tell the truth, the right thing will happen. Because if you don't tell the truth and you tell a lie, then now we're in a game because you're going to have to perpetuate that for possibly forever. Are you cool with that? When you see that person in 10 years time and they bring it up and you've forgotten about it, how's that going to work out? So
How
your
can you?
ability to
Yeah.
put effort.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sorry.
Sorry. Karen, sorry, Johnny, I interrupted.
No. So just to summarize, you can control your effort, you can control your attitude, and you can control your ability to tell the truth. And what sometimes people mistake is, just because something is difficult, it doesn't mean that you need to find an easier option. Quite often in life, the hard way forward is the right way forward, and we spend a lot of time in life. And again, it's perpetuated by social media now. Everyone's looking for hacks and easy ways, when actually, quite often, the hard way through is the right way forward. Unfortunately,
Yeah. Yeah. And in a world where, in a sense, there is this element in the modern world, I've seen it in business particularly, where people who lie seem to get ahead. And you think, well, but the problem is that it is an idiot's game because you can't, if you tell one lie, like you said, there's then this problem of there's 10 offshoots to it. So there's 10 other things you have to lie about, and then you have to lie repeatedly to that person and then to others because you're often in a network of people, and then that's just one lie, and then the more you tell, etc., etc., and then people realize you're lying, and then I've heard people say, "Oh, he lies to my face."
hmm.
I know that he does, and it's like, yes, that should really, really worry you
Yeah,
because if they lie to your face and they can try and make it look like they're not lying, then that's a very competent but dangerous liar. And then I think as well, there's an arrogance about thinking you can distort reality and expect others to believe in that distorted reality. It's like this is
yeah.
insane, but people do all the time. It's like a bugbear of mine where you think if you just tell the truth, we are going to get much further on, and the world's better.
The 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 bit that's scary about that is that let's change the word from lie to narrative, because lie comes with a lot of other sort of connected emotions and preconceived ideas of what a lie is. So let's say something really, really unpleasant happens to you, and you decide that instead of accepting that you're just going to create a little narrative in your head that you can accept instead, because you don't want to accept reality as it is. Now, once you do that, once you have that reality, because here's the thing, like memory, a lot of people think that memory is like a little miniature movie that you put on in your mind and it's always the same, but it isn't. Memory's more like a canvas that every time you revisit that memory, you sort of paint over it a little bit more, depending on the mood you're in or the context that you might have got, or the fact that when you had that experience, you were 6 and now you're 20, and you look back at it and you all of a sudden go, wait. So I watched something like this happen before. I was at a dinner party, and it was my wife and I and some friends, and there was a brother and sister there, and they're both with their partners. And we were talking about dogs as kids and family pets and stuff. And the sister says, "Oh yeah, when we were young, our dog went to live on a farm, and the brother's drinking his beer and he just spits it out and laughs, and everybody looks over, and I knew exactly what was about to happen, and I looked at him as if to say, don't." And he says, and she says, "What are you laughing at?" He says, "I can't believe at your age that you still believe that story." And she said, "What story?" And she said, "The dog didn't go to a farm, the dog died." And I watched this sister, even though she knew that logically the dog would be dead anyway, she went into full blown grief in front of me. Because it wasn't about the dead dog, it was about the betrayal, it was about the lie. And she found it out, and it ruined her night. She went home. And even though logically she's like, well, of course, the dog, even if the dog did go to a farm, it would be dead by now. That didn't matter to her. The fact that her whole family had lied to her and she'd believed this lie, and she felt really silly because once he had said the dog was dead, all of a sudden the truth comes in like a tsunami, and she goes, oh. And then everything makes sense and everything's obvious, but she can't handle that level of truth all at once. So she just goes into this shutdown, and it was horrendous. It was not the time for that at all. So that's the impact of it. Someone can really, really want to believe something, and the truth, the narrative that they create, the lie that they create, doesn't always have to come from a sinister place. It can be a well-meaning thing. It can be a protection mechanism, but nonetheless, it's not true. And that's the bit that we have to get to. We have to get to what's true, because once we start accepting what's true, we can then align our emotions with reality, if that makes sense. Might have gone off on a rant
Yeah.
there.
No, no, but it makes sense. And it's important to discuss as well, because how many people come across something that they know to be untrue, and how many more people convince themselves of something that logically can't be right. Um, but if we just move ahead, Johnny, in terms of just moving back, in a way, moving back to your relationship with alcohol, was there an element within you where you thought, oh, did you lie to yourself that it wasn't a problem, or was it always the case that you came to realize that there was a problem and that you had to address that to move forward in life, and to maybe discover more the truth about you, because no doubt maybe the alcohol was masking it a bit or was distorting your ability to understand yourself?
Yeah, I think alcohol is a particularly tricky addiction, because it's so socially acceptable. For a long time, I was concerned about my alcohol consumption, and I go to my doctor, and one doctor said to me, "I drink more than that." So, what do you say to that? What do you say to that? So it's like, all right, so I'm fine then, but I'm not fine, because here's the thing, right? Your addiction is only a problem if it's a problem to you. If it's ruining your life, if it's ruining your experiences, if it's affecting your mental health and your emotional health and your physical health, if it's happening to you, then don't allow anyone else to tell you it's wrong. You see, if somebody has an affair, people can see that's wrong, right? They understand it. If someone takes illegal drugs, they can say, oh, well, yeah, that's really bad. You shouldn't be doing that. If somebody's gambling and losing loads of money when the kids are starving and whatever else is going on, they can see the problem with that. But if someone's not drink, like for me, I wasn't an alcoholic by any stretch of the imagination, but I had a problematic relationship with alcohol. And what that means is Monday through till Thursday, Friday, I didn't drink alcohol. Wasn't even tempted. Unless there was a birthday or a particular occasion, then I wouldn't have any alcohol. But once I got to Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I would drink like I was making up for the rest of the week, and I wouldn't stop. I'd drink into the night. And the thing is, there was always somebody there. Usually, I mean, quite a lot. I was at time I was drinking on my own. Actually, that's not true. I was drinking on my own, but and I'd outlast everybody. But I'd drink a few glasses with my wife, and then she'd go to bed, and then I'd carry on. I'd go out with some friends. We'd have some beers. They'd go home. We'd go home, and I'd go home, and then I'd open some wine. So it was that little private extra that I did. So I was always latching on to, oh, it's fine because I'm doing it with my friends, or it's fine because I'm having drinks with my wife, or it's fine because I'm having wine with lunch and everyone else has got wine. Whereas you don't usually say, oh, it's fine because I'm here with a bunch of people that are also cheating on their partners. It's fine because I'm in this drug house or whatever. It's really obvious that that's not right. So alcohol is a very tricky one because we're so socially acceptable sort of addiction in a way. And it wasn't until I stopped drinking that I really realized how loud the alcohol advertising is. For a start, I remember in lockdown, I went to go into the supermarket, and as you remember, it was a very strange time, and everything was a bit terrifying anyway. And I remember getting out of my car and going over to the trolley, and I picked up, pulled the trolley out, and on the trolley handle was an advertisement for beer. So I hadn't even got into the shop yet, and it was telling me to drink. Now I don't know if that's right, wrong, whatever. It is what it is, but I'm just saying that it's not going to be that you go to the supermarket and someone's offering you sex. It's not going to someone's you go to the supermarket and someone's trying to sell you drugs. That was the supermarket and someone was trying to sell me alcohol. So it's a different type of addiction, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I guess if it's freely available, that's when you have the issue, right? Because let's face it, any supermarket, any petrol station in Britain, anything of that kind, you will always find it adverts chronically, particularly late at night, and it's like whenever there's mass availability of your particular addictive substance or behavioral side of it, in terms of the internet's very available in terms of you can watch anything on the internet, and it's kind of, whereas I suppose drugs are a little bit different because you have to source them. I
Mm.
don't know what the differences are in terms of. I guess every behavior is different, every substance is different, but the addictive experience seems to be what is. Is that what unites all addictions? I'm not sure. What do you think? What does it unite all addictions, if anything?
I think it's how it makes you feel. How it makes you feel is that escape.
Mm.
So I would go out with friends. So I would walk around with emotional trauma all the time on me. The way that my father was as a kid affected every aspect of my life, the way that I saw the world. So I would walk around and basically everything was triggering. Loud noises, certain types of people, certain situations, they would all be triggering. So for me to go out with friends and to come across relatively normal in any way, I would drink alcohol, and it'd make me feel normal. It would make me feel like I was able to talk to people. It'd make me feel like I was accepted. So remember, I said at the beginning that I experienced a considerable amount of rejection. Well, I didn't experience that when I was drinking. Now that wasn't because I was accepted as such. It was probably because I just didn't care. So I would walk around feeling like that, and because the addiction is for me was I didn't want to stop feeling like that. And I knew that if I went to bed and I woke up in the morning, that I would feel normal again. So what did I do? I just stayed awake drinking because I couldn't bear the idea of going to sleep and waking up the next day and things being the same as they usually are. So for me, it's not about, it's also about the culture that you build around your addiction. So for me to be sober, I have to build a culture of sobriety around myself. I have to have sober friends. I have to have people in my life and things in my life that I can hold on to that say I'm the same as instead of I'm different. Because when you walk around sober, you have so many different situations in life where people tell you that you're different or make you feel strange or weird, because you don't drink. But actually, I found lots of ways around that helped me. So I drink non-alcoholic beers, and quite often I try to pour it into a glass so that people don't notice that it's not an non-alcoholic beer. So then there's no conversation about it. When I first went sober, it was a
Me too.
nightmare. People would go, "Oh, you don't drink," and I'd say, "Oh, yeah, I had childhood trauma," and I'm like, "Wow." It's like, okay, buddy, I'll
Oh
catch you
no.
later. It's just a bit much, isn't it? So now I've got
Just
this
kill me.
like yeah, it's like you're heavy, man. So I wanted to laugh and talk about Ricky Gervais, but there you are, killing the mood. So, so yeah. Now what I say is, I don't say that I'm sober. I just say I don't drink, and then people go, "Oh, why is that?" And I say, "I'm just not very good at it," and then they laugh, and then we move on. I just do everything I can to defuse the situation. I think when you say you're sober, and I can only speak from my perspective, it's not that I'm ashamed of it or anything like that, because people have asked me that before. It's just that I'm looking for ways to make things easier for myself. I'm looking for ways for people just to recognize or not recognize that I don't drink alcohol, and then move on from it as quick as we can. Let's not make it a center of attention or a big talking point. Let's just move on, because it isn't to me. I
Yeah,
don't hang my hat on being sober. I'm not, it doesn't matter to me that I'm sober anymore. I'm very fortunate that I've been sober for 4 years, and um, I try not to make it the main character in my life. I don't want it to define me. It's just part of who I am now, and I'm proud of it, and I'm really proud of it, and I protect it like you wouldn't believe, because it's very important to me. But the more I make it important to somebody else, it feels like I'm shoving it down their throat, and they think I'm becoming very evangelical about it, because I don't have to be like that. People have put their connotations on what it means. Oh, you're sober, so what you're trying to say is that I'm a drunk, no, I'm not as good as you. And it's like, well, I'm not saying any of that. But that's
yeah,
just the narrative they build. You know,
yeah. It's frustration. But that's frustrating because I'm exactly the same as you. Zero alcohol beer. I like the taste of beer. I just like the alcohol. So it's one of those things where it's like if Coca Cola started putting alcohol in a Coke can, I would try and get the non-alcoholic version. I like Coca Cola. I just
yeah,
don't want the alcohol in it. Do you know
yeah,
what I mean? So it's one of those things where you think, well, it it is strange though, and in a way, it's a bit of a concern that in Britain, if you don't drink, that is a point of intense curiosity and discussion,
mm,
and it's because it's so outside of the norm. Even though I think it is becoming more normal, particularly apparently amongst younger people. I don't
yeah.
know if I
I was
should be
happy to
starting
hear
trying
that.
trying to figure that one out. Yeah, but you just sort of sat there thinking, well, it shouldn't be a big issue, and it's a personal choice about one drink. But yeah, it's become one of those things. But it sounds as if that you learned a lot from that experience of addiction. Do you think that's informed your coaching work?
Yeah, yeah. It made me look deeper into emotions. Um, just one more thing on that alcohol thing. I think that in essence, when people go out together drinking, there's an unspoken social contract that sort of happens. Is that we're all drinking, we're all going to get pissed and make fools of ourselves. Yeah, we're all going to be in the same boat. Some of us might go a bit further than others, but generally speaking, we're all going to make idiots of ourselves. What do you mean you're not doing it?
Mm.
Wait a second. Why are you not doing it? So you're going to be sober amongst all of us. Well, that makes me feel really uncomfortable, and I think that's what happens. I think people unknowingly get a bit suspicious and a bit distrusting of somebody that's not drinking. It's a bit like, well, why? you know, I think that's what happens in a sense.
Yeah, and that makes more sense. And I guess one of the issues is it's quite rare nowadays that people do sit and consider things at a deeper level. So, like you've just said about you can analyze the situation that happens, right? A lot of people they'll go into a situation where there's a problem or there's a bit of tension, and then they will not reflect on it afterwards. So the
No,
route goes unattended to, and then later on it happens again, or there's a trigger, like you were saying about the triggers. And I guess if you never reflect on the triggers, how can you stop being triggered by them or learn to manage the trigger? Is that a fair
yeah,
question?
I I think our emotions are our software. Like we have this phone, right? This phone is the hardware. It's just an object without the software on it. It's just something that I know is what do you do with it? What use is it to anybody? But the software on it allows you to communicate. It allows you to find out information. It allows you to buy things. It allows you to do so many things that you couldn't do if the software wasn't on it. And I think if we think of our bodies as the hardware, our emotions are the software. And everybody has different emotions or different ways. Everyone has the same emotions, but they have different ways of translating what they mean. What it means in essence is the meaning that we apply to these emotions. What do these emotions mean when we have them? What does it mean? And we get lots of opportunities as kids. We witness different emotions. We experience different emotions. We have this emotional experience, and then we apply a meaning to it, and then we repeat that meaning enough times until it becomes a belief system, and then we believe that becomes our software. And those emotions are the way that our soul speaks to us. Our emotions are the directions that we should take in life. When we have those emotions about whether we should or shouldn't trust somebody, whether we have those emotions about whether we do or don't like something, they're messages. They're there to tell us something and direct us and help us operate in the world. Problem is, those emotions and those softwares, just like software on here, they can be corrupted. They can get viruses. Things can go wrong, and things can be misinterpreted. And if you see when the software on here needs updating, and all of a sudden WhatsApp's not working and Instagram's not working, and your bank app keeps turning off, it's because it needs updating, right? It needs attention, and that's what I do. I kind of help people have an emotional update. I look at their emotions about what they mean, and I try not to feed those emotions with any sort of interpretation. I want that person to work out what they mean, what it means. And it's interesting, if you let somebody talk long enough, human beings organize their mind through conversation. So if you let them talk for long enough, they'll work it out for themselves. And that's the best way they can do it. They'll sit there and they'll all of a sudden hear themselves say something. And then they'll stop and they'll say, huh, I didn't know I felt that way. And I say, it's interesting, right? How does that make you feel now you know that? Well, I know that's not right. That's not right. Why am I thinking that even though I know it's not right? I said, well, I don't say it, but I'm thinking probably because you made that meaning when you were 8 and now you're 28. So it's going to be a little bit different, but you've just never updated the software. So now we're updating it. We can reapply that meaning, and again, that's where the habit kicks in, because the habit keeps telling us that the meaning is right, the meaning is right, the meaning is right, but it's not, because you're going, well, I know it's not right, but it still feels like it is. And it takes practice, that practice of going into a situation and saying, when that person speaks to me like that, it doesn't mean this. It feels like it does though, but it doesn't mean this. Sometimes that means you've got to avoid a person or not go somewhere for a little while. Certainly was the case for me when I went sober.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the interesting thing. I heard it said by Jordan Peterson, who talked about there is a curative element to just talking. That he found that with his clients. It sounds like you found the same with yours. That if people talk long enough, like you just said, there is an element of uncovering of who they really are, which is amazing. It's amazing, and it makes you think how many people could benefit from just being listened to by someone who
Mm.
wants to hear what they have to say and wants to work with them to try and find solutions. 'Cause I'm guessing that why do people go to therapy? And perhaps one of the reasons is that they've just never had the chance to do it with anybody. Do you think that's fair?
I think that from a very young age, we learn about who we are through other people's reactions to us. And I think I did a talk at a school recently, and some of the questions I got asked by the students afterwards were heartbreaking. One girl asked me, she said, I've been looking at YouTube videos of how to make friends and nothing's working. Can you help me? And I was just like, wow, it just broke my heart. This young girl who's looking at YouTube videos to make friends, like that hurts me inside. That really does. But what I think has happened is that the for some of those children, the 2 years, the 3 years that we were in lockdowns and had pandemics going on, they got robbed of their ability to socialize. Now, at a certain age, we learn how to socially interact. We learn what we're allowed to say, what we're not allowed to say, what's acceptable, what isn't, what's enough touching, what isn't. All of these things. You've seen little children, they just touch stuff and lick stuff. If we did that as adults, we wouldn't go so well, would it? So there comes an age in the teenagers where we learn how much touching is too much touching, what words you're allowed to say, how loud your voice is allowed to be, how do we interact, what's acceptable, how do we behave in the world. And those kids were robbed of that. That was taken away from them. They didn't get to learn that. To double down on it, to make it even worse, is they spoke online. But the thing is, they think they're connecting online, but they're not, because online socialization, it mimics connection. It makes you feel like you really know somebody, but then when you meet them in real life, you don't. They're a bit taller than you thought, or they're a bit shorter than you thought, or they're a bit more awkward, and you go in for a hug because you feel like you really know them, and they don't like to be touched. All of these things happen, and you just didn't know it, and it becomes so difficult because you start misinterpreting cues, and it just becomes really clunky and awkward. And I think that there's a certain generation where that's really happened to, and it's really sad. They don't know how to start conversations. They don't know how to interact with each other. They don't know what's funny, what isn't. All of these things that we might take for granted, they don't know how to do it because they didn't have that opportunity. And it's terrifying to me that that's happened. And it's something I'd really like to be a part of helping with. Because again, if they're not aware of that, how are they going to change it? You know?
Yeah. And at the key developmental ages as well. I mean, I remember thinking this when we were at uni. I was at uni during the lockdown period, and everyone felt robbed of something, right?
Yeah,
Because even if you're an adult, you felt robbed of time outside or time with friends, etc., and the bubble system, etc. was very difficult. But and I felt, I was robbed of being able to have the full uni experience because of the fact that we could only go in for tutorials and everything else online. But then these kids who were 7 or 8 at the time, obviously that's quite a key age range, I guess, and then into your first year of secondary, that sort of thing, and they're being robbed of that. And it's like actually, it would have been a far bigger catastrophe to have been robbed of those key developmental periods where it's then stunted compared to being 19 or 20 or whatever and missing a year of uni
yeah,
in effect.
yeah,
So it's kind of like, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, in a way you're grateful for your own problem compared to someone else's.
yeah. I mean, and going back to your original statement on Jordan Peterson about being heard, it's we, like I say, we learn about ourselves by reactions of the people around us. We learn how to be in the world, which doesn't necessarily help us know ourselves. We just know how we're supposed to behave. We might not do that instinctively. We might not want to do that. We might not even agree to it in some ways. We all have situations where we have to conform in life. We have to dress a certain way, act a certain way, be a certain way because that's what's expected of us in that scenario or that situation. But that doesn't help us learn who we are. Who are we when no one's watching? Who are we when we just want to relax? And we don't know. A lot of the time, I get hit with this question where somebody has to, I've got a client in front of me and they have to make a very difficult decision. And it feels impossible. And there's lots of emotions stirring up for them. And it feels like if they go this way, there's a problem. If they go that way, there's a problem. If they go ahead, there's a problem. And they just want to bury their head in the sand and not think about it. But they have to think about it because they have to make a decision. And they sit there and they get so overwhelmed by it all. And they say to me, "Oh, Johnny, what would you do?" Which is basically just tell me who I am. Tell me what to do. And I always say the same thing. It's very annoying, I'm sure. But I say, what is it you want to hear me say right now? Because deep down inside you, you do know what the answer is, but you're probably scared. It probably comes with an action you don't really want to do. It probably comes with a whole bunch of other decisions you don't want to make. So you're trying to find the hack. You're trying to find the easy way through. And what you want me to tell you is, oh, you should do this. And then you go along and you do it. And then if it goes really well, you don't feel like you've managed to achieve anything because you didn't make the decision. Or if it goes really wrong, you get to blame me for it. And you have to live with the consequences of my choices. Nothing to do with you at all. So you're still not learning who you are. And what that means is don't be afraid to make mistakes because we learn something about ourselves when we make mistakes. We also learn stuff about ourselves when we do things right. But we have to trust our instinct. And it's not about getting it right. It's about committing to your own opinion. It's about committing to who you are, casting
Yeah,
a vote for yourself, you know, building a reputation with yourself. Are you the type of person that turns up? Like if you tell yourself something, and this is not a judgment, this is just an observation. If you tell yourself that you're going to do something on Monday and Monday comes and you don't do it, you have just let yourself down. If you do that enough times, then you build a really bad reputation with yourself, which means that your self worth isn't very good. So it's about practicing being the person that you want to show up for yourself the way you would want others to. If you and me were friends, and every time I said we're going to meet down the pub or meet down the cafe, and I didn't turn up, it's not long before you stop calling. But you can't do that with yourself. You
Yeah.
just can't. So you end up just sitting in some place where you don't like yourself, and self-loathing, and no low self-worth. And this is what I mean. This whole thing is connected, and it can be complicated, or it can be really simple, sort of.
Yeah, and but that's one of the things that you're saying about like simplicity. I found that with my own behavior, with behavior of family, behavior of friends, where you sit and think about it and think, why did that happen? Why did this happen? And then it feels as if it should be simple, that your mind should be quite simple because you're with yourself all the time. That's one of the biggest problems for some people. Um, it's you just think, well, I am with myself all the time, but here I am not being able to understand myself despite that, despite the fact that I'm with myself all the time. And it's not simple, but it should be because I don't know about anything else. Like another problem, like if you sit with, I don't know, let's say you're in your car and there's a noise. If you sit and listen long enough, you'll probably realize where it is and what the problem is, or you can at least narrow it down and then take it to a mechanic, right? Can't seem to do that with the human mind. It's really frustrating, and I don't really know how to how to deal with that in a sense. I don't know if you've come across that where people are really struggling. I don't know. I rambled a bit there.
Yeah. No, not at all. That was a really nice analogy. And it's not that people can't do that; it's that people either don't know how or don't want to. I think that's probably closer to the truth. And just then you said, "Why did that happen?" I think you said sometimes you have events that happen in your life, and you ask yourself, "Why did that happen?" And I think right there is something we could change. Instead of saying, "Why did it happen?" ask, "What made it happen?" Because now you start to look at the nuts and bolts of it. Why did it happen will probably lead to because my friend's this or my brother's that or I'm this or I'm that, because you don't know why. We don't ever really know the intentional why something happened. We don't know that. What happened? Well, this happened. What led to that happening? Well, when so and so said this, they reacted that way. And okay, I'm starting to understand it a little bit more, and I'm starting to get to the understanding of it. Maybe what I could do differently next time, because this is what causes those emotional triggers, is the fear of it happening again. So you have an event that happens that has a significant emotion attached to it. And then when you experience a variation of that emotion, you have this overwhelming fear that the thing that happened before is going to happen again. So we're trying to reassure ourselves. So if we can analyze a situation and we can analyze the emotions that we're having and soothe ourselves, we can also look at the events and say, well, so and so ended up punching so and so. And actually, what I could have done differently is I could have left. I could have stepped in and said, hey, calm down, guys. I could have done lots of different things because I've asked myself what happened instead of why it happened. Because why it happened probably will lead to because my mate's a dick, something like that, something really unhelpful.
Yeah.
That has no real sort of resolution to it. It's just judgment, isn't it? So I think it's about asking the questions the right way. And in every time as a coach, obviously my job is to ask a lot of questions, and there will always come a question uh, that the person doesn't know the answer to. And then I get the opportunity, I could change the question, but no, because this hard question that they're not answering is probably the crux of the problem. So let's ask the question again. Let's explore the question. Let's dig deep. Let's get involved. And you can see it in their face. They don't want to do that. It scares them. They feel uncomfortable. Emotions start to come up. Eyes start to well up. People start to tap and fidget and look away and come up with different stories. And some of them are really clever. They try to manipulate me and change the story and narrative and move away from things. And I'll say to them, look, I recognize that that's what you're doing, and it's fine. We can do that, but I'm not going to play. you know and they're just like, oh, like my clients hate me way before they find me helpful and love me or whatever. Because I'm here to find the truth, and the truth is the thing that you've probably been avoiding for a long time, which is what's causing the problem. So you're not going to like it, probably. And that doesn't mean I'm going to be aggressive with it. Don't That probably sounded like I was going to force you to see the truth, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to sit with you and long enough, and I'm going to keep reflecting back to you the things that you're saying and the things you're doing, because this is what happens with behavior. There's a tension, there's a conflict between what you're saying and what you're doing, and I'm pointing that out, that indiscrepancy, and giving you the opportunity in that moment to have a look at it. And then sometimes you go, oh, I don't want to talk about that. Okay, okay, we won't. I'm not going to force them, but one day we're going to get to a situation where I'm like, well, if we don't talk about it, we probably won't be able to resolve it. Are you okay with that? And then they've got to say yes. It becomes difficult.
Yeah.
Anyway, because I've probably just talked myself out of a lot of coaching clients there.
I hope not, Johnny. But it's one of those things where you have to be truthful about your experience as a coach and how to best help people. Because I think that's one of the other things is people talk about, this may be a bit of a tangent, but they talk about sort of unconditional positive regard, and you should always encourage the client, and you shouldn't challenge the client too much. Um, but then again, like you say, if you're trying to get to the truth, there is a level that you're going to have to be challenging. You're going to have to be incisive. I guess you're going to have to keep tapping, keep prodding, keep trying to get the best outcome for them,
Yeah,
which is the truth.
yeah, and I would I would agree that with the unconditional positive regard, and I would agree with not challenging. There are because what that could mean is say something really horrendous has happened to somebody. Um, Say they were sexually assaulted or something like that, and perhaps they hadn't realized that they hadn't realized they're sexually assaulted, and when they're telling me a certain story, I'm building this picture up, and I'm hearing you were assaulted, but I can see they don't realize it. I don't think it's my job to tell them. I think it's their job to recognize it
Okay.
and to allow their body, their mind to come to that conclusion themselves if they are ever ready to, you know? Because what happens if they're at work and they're talking to me on their lunch break and we just help this person realize they were sexually assaulted now and they've got to go back to work? That's not ideal. So I don't direct people. I deal with what people bring to me. And what I'm always looking for is the truth, but I have to be gentle and respectful and considerate with their feelings and their life. It's not about me brutally saying, "Well, it sounds to me like you were sexually assaulted." That's so reckless. That can destroy people. It can have an emotional shutdown. They like I said, like that girl that recognized that her dog hadn't gone to a farm, it had actually died. All of that comes flooding in all at once, and your body doesn't know what to do with it. It's like, sometimes it's a crude example, but sometimes when you open too many apps on your phone and it just gets overwhelmed and turns itself off. That can happen to us.
Yeah.
That can happen to us. We open too many apps, we get utterly overwhelmed, and we just shut down. Done. Not playing anymore. And how long we stay shut down and how that looks is completely different for everybody. So I would agree with that. We do have to have unconditional positive regard, and we do have to be careful about how we challenge people. When I say I challenge people, what I'm doing is I'm doing it really slowly, really nudging. And if people, I'm watching everything all the time. I'm taking in the tone of their voice, the way that they're sitting, the words they're saying, the words they're not saying, whether they've got a nervous giggle, whether their eyes are starting to well up, whatever it is. Sometimes you can even see, if I'm working one to one in person, sometimes people can smell different. Sometimes they can perspire and they can change color a little bit. And these are all things that you notice as you become better at your job. And all of these things are giving me cues whether it's a good idea or not a good idea to ask that question or to reflect that piece of information.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's tricky. I'm glad it's not me in a way, Johnny. I feel like I'd be terrible at therapy in some ways, but it's we need people like yourself. We need people who understand how to deal with people on that level and all of the cues, because it's easy enough people saying, "Oh well, I think I'm quite good at reading body language," or "I think I'm quite good at reading tone of voice," but actually, it's much harder, I'm guessing, to have all of that package all together in the right amount, and then whilst you're perceiving all of the cues, you're also thinking, well, you got to listen to what they're saying and the consequences of your approach to that, and then so it's a complex job. I guess that's one of the things
Yeah.
is I've never really spoken to a therapist about the job itself, so it's it's quite interesting to hear your perspective on how you do it, because I'm guessing a lot of people I don't know, a lot of people who've gone to therapy or going to therapy, and you never really get a chance to speak to the therapist about how they feel. It's all about you. It's one of those
Well,
things.
yeah, yeah, it is, but it should be always about them. And there's another aspect to it as well. Is over time you learn to trust your instincts about what something might mean when someone's talking to you. The way that their behavior, you interpretate their behavior in a certain way. And what you have to be careful about is that the emotional response, the very low level, minor emotional response that you're having, is this a response that is happening about them, or is what they're saying causing a response about you? Are you having an emotional reaction to what they're saying, or is that you're having empathy about what they're saying? You know, just making sure that because what you say next or what you do next or whether you say or don't say anything is going to be dictated on how you interpret that particular feeling right there. And that's why for me I watch all of the cues of somebody and I don't just say, oh, they're sweating, they're nervous, or they're stuttering, or they've got this nervous giggle. I'm collecting evidence. I'm collecting lots of different cues together and saying, well, now they've done this, and this, and perhaps now maybe it's time to change the conversation a little bit. Maybe that's enough for today, or whatever, you know. So it's not just one thing; it's many things, and also you're just factoring in at the same time that you're not having an impact on the conversation because what the most freeing thing I think I ever learned was that it's not my responsibility to fix somebody else. It's not my responsibility to tell them how they feel and what they should do. I have absolutely no responsibility for this person at all other than to look after them while they explore their own mind. They are the driver of the vehicle. I am the co pilot. I'm like an irritating sat nav that tells you, are you sure it's this way? Turn around. All of that sort of thing. You know, so
Impossible making.
I'm the, yeah, I'm the co pilot and I'm just there to keep you safe, you know? Um, so it's a great job. I've had so many. I don't want to say I've had successes. I've watched clients have many successes over the years that they've been brave enough to unpeel the onion and to find out what they're about. Um, and it's a real privilege. It really is. It's a real privilege. My job.
Yeah, well, that's brilliant. And as well, people enjoying the job as well. That's an amazing feeling. And obviously, the sense that you're giving back to people and what have you. And just moving on from that, Johnny, just towards the personal rather than the professional. We understand that you like to do things like mountaineering and hiking. Would you mind telling us a bit more about those exploits? Because they do sound really interesting, and it's not often that you hear of people who do these like epic adventures, and it'd be quite cool to learn about it.
Yeah. Well, I think you've said in a nutshell what it's about. For me, it's about adventure. It's about being out in the mountains, and it's about things being difficult. See, here's the thing I love about the mountains. The mountains don't care if you're cold. They don't care if you're tired. They don't care if you get to the top or you don't get to the top. They don't care if your legs hurt. They don't care if you feel sick. They don't care if you've got a headache. They will not change. You have to change for them or not. And it's the ultimate
Yeah,
adventure where you find out about yourself. You find out what you're about, whether you've been lying to yourself for ages and telling yourself that you're this and you're that, and then when you get in a real situation you're not any of those things. Or maybe you find out you're way stronger than you really thought you was. It's usually a combination of the both, and that's what I love the fact that it strips you bare. You don't have any energy left for any false narratives or bullshit that you tell yourself. You find out who you really are, the truth about yourself. That's what you do, and you go out somewhere in the mountains. Certainly, my experience. Anyway, I've unfortunately had altitude sickness 3 times. It's really, really not nice. Twice I managed to battle through and summit, and then the last time in Kilimanjaro, unfortunately, I got to base camp and I wasn't able to continue. And that was an experience because in my career at the moment, this year especially, um, I'm trying to speak on bigger stages, on bigger events. I'm hoping to travel abroad and speak. And all of that comes with a very healthy set of fears, very understandable set of fears. And for a long time, I'd sort of been masterfully procrastinating, I suppose, finding these things that I thought were really important that I should be getting on with, and that should be getting done, actually as a way of not doing the things that I should be doing. But they really were brilliant procrastinations. They were things that really looked like they will work, but they wasn't. They were just very clever ways of disguising the fact that I was terrified of doing this thing. Because quite often, I think people think they fear failure. I think in many ways, I actually fear success, because a little bit of me knows that because I speak publicly, I speak very well, and that I talk about things in a way in which people understand and resonate, that I'll probably do quite well at it. It's something quite terrifying about that concept, you know? So for me, I think that when I had to choose to fail, I realized that in Kilimanjaro, I was taking one foot in front of the other, just like I'd done twice times before. And I was willing to suffer all of my way to the summit instead of just failing. And people say, "Oh, but you didn't fail." And I say, "I did fail. Don't take it away from me." You know, I went to Kilimanjaro to get to the top and I didn't get to the top. I failed. But guess what? The world didn't come to an end. I'm okay. Everything is okay. And I needed to do that. I needed to do that because here's the thing: if I don't be brave and face my fears, then I can't fail. And I don't have to experience failure. So that's what I was doing. So by choosing
Yeah.
failure, experiencing failure, and realizing that the world didn't come to an end, it was actually quite good for me. Don't want to do it again, but but it was a good lesson, you know.
But that's like yeah. So the beauty of failure is that you can learn a lot about yourself, and then that's well, self awareness is then much higher than that. I mean, that's a massive, massive, massive thing, and I guess you probably learn more. Certainly, my experience of you learn more through failures, or you learn more through difficult experiences. You know, I had one recently. I think actually it's made me a much better person. I've understood myself better, understood others better, and as well, it can be corrective as well. I guess fairly because you can think, yeah, actually the course was off. Like it's like a ship
Hmm.
a few degrees off. But the problem is, the longer you go along, the more the tendency is the degrees get more and more. Then you realize you're bending more and more of course. So the quicker you realize you've got a problem, or that there's something about you that's not particularly palatable. I mean, that's the other thing, right? Is that you learn things about yourself. You think, oh my god, I really wish
Yeah,
I'd
yeah,
never knew that, and that's. Like, I'm shocked at myself, and I must I've got to take action because you can't live like that. You can't have these things as well. Things like fear, like you're saying about fear. Um, I guess did you think you lived within some level of fear at times, and you found it hard to break out of the boundaries? I'm guessing that's a common experience for a lot of people.
yeah. I mean, I lived in fear as a kid, so it was a familiar feeling, and it probably came with a lot of emotional triggers for me that I was working through. But being up on that hill, and having to choose failure, because it was a choice. It kind of wasn't. I'm not going to tell you that there was a way I could. I don't know. I don't know if I would have got to the top. Is the truth. I don't think I would have done. I was really, really unwell. I had a pounding heart rate and a banging head, and I was being projectile vomiting. So unlikely I would have got to the top. But right at the bottom, I was sort of asked, half an hour in, can you do this for another 10 to 15 hours? And I was like, no, I can't. And that was hard for me because I don't really fail at things as such, because I don't give up. And I think ultimately, if a failure is an experience, and it's an experience that comes with a significant emotion. And I think any experience that comes with a significant emotion teaches you so much. It really does. It teaches you more than you probably want to, or at that time are ready to comprehend, but you never forget it. So now when I go to speak in front of big crowds, and I remember that I was standing, which was another random thing. I'm in Africa and it's snowing, so that was weird. So I'm standing in the snow in Africa. I've just been sick, and my heart's banging and my head's banging, and I'm like, I can't do this, And I learned about myself. I learned about myself. So now when I go out on them big stages, I know I can do that. I can do that. I can talk, as you've witnessed this evening. I can
Yeah,
talk about this sort of thing forever, So it's not a big deal. It's the mountains is my testing ground. It's where I go to learn who I am and where I'm at. You know, to learn what's possible and what isn't.
yeah,
It's an unforgiving territory, really is.
yeah. I mean, I'm hoping to do it one day. I've got to do it. I think it's one of them things where you think that that fear factor, like everyone lives in some level of fear or something. I think mine is probably that. You think, can I actually do it? Do I have it? Could I do this? Could I do that? And until you do it, you're never going to know, right? And you learn all the time through doing it. Um, I can talk about that for hours as well. But as we draw to the end, Johnny, one thing that we always ask guests is really the missing line is about trying to fill knowledge gaps. And one of the things is there something that you could leave with us in terms of a quote or an idea that might be of help to people that's helped you, or a book? I'm not sure if you've got anything to add to that.
Um, I think
On the spot
that's a
then.
interesting. No, I think practice translating your emotions. I think that's the key to it all for me. Um, your emotions are how your soul speaks to you. And the more that you listen to your emotions, the more that you start to recognize and interpret what they mean and what they're telling you, the more aligned with your life you'll become. And I don't want to say easier, but the more comfortable, I suppose, life will become for you, because you'll start to learn about who you are and who you're not. I suppose that's all I'd say. What I do, what I help people with is the most, is helping them translate their emotions. What are their emotions telling them? What do they mean?
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. As well, we've had so many different people say different things, and that's certainly one of them. I mean, that's a massive life skill, right? And if people learn that, that would be obviously incredible. And yeah, we just wish you well, Johnny, as well with all of your coaching work and all of your adventures. And no doubt we'll be hearing of you more soon, and we'll keep in touch and hopefully have you on again soon.
Thank you so much for having me on today. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.